Welcome to an introduction to Accelerate and the Dora DevOps reports. I'm Ester Daniel. You can find me at Chocolate Driven Development, where I do technical agile coaching. And you can also find my blog there. As a technical agile coach, my job is to help developers get the skills, both technical and social, that enables DevOps, Agile, all those things that we want. And to do that, I need to know what actually works. And that is one of the reasons that I really like Accelerate and the Dora DevOps reports. I also like science. And that's what this is. It's an evidence-based transformation that they're talking about. We've done a lot of transforming in the IT industry lately, the agile thing, the DevOps thing, but it's mostly been people using their experience, guessing, going by best practices. We never really knew what worked, but now we do. The Dora team, with help from Puppet, that's where it started, have done 7 reports since 2014. 2020 was lost, as to a lot of us. In 2021, they had 32,000 respondents. And it's survey-based because that's the best way to get data. And then they have a lot of statistical methods, like constructs, and they do all kind of validations. I took my statistics class 6 times before I passed. So it might be that we should ask someone else for the details, but it sounds solid to me, at least. And I did pass it the last time, so yes. And everything is based on 4 measurements, where they have speed, that is measured by commit to the deploy. And then it's not the first commit you do when you start working on your task. It's where you're done with the development and you start to push it through the pipeline to get it to customer where it brings value. The second metric for speed is deploy frequency. How often do you push to production? And if you're an iOS developer, you don't really push to production. You give it to Apple and you pray. So then it doesn't really count. But you have it somewhere else. Perhaps every time you push to your beta testers apps or test flight or whatever app you're using. So deploy frequency. Stability is the other measurement. And there they have time to recover. Things go bad in production. When it does, either by exploding big, everything goes down, or something that is a small problem, but you really need to fix it. How long does it take to get it working again? And the other one is change fail rate. So how often of the times that you push to production is there something that doesn't go the way you intended? The first 3 metrics are a solid construct. They pass all the statistical validations tests for showing the same thing. This one behaves a bit weirdly, and I think that's something that we could talk more about. But the first 3 ones are solid. Okay, so then what do? They have those 4 metrics and 32,000 survey answers. They do cluster analysis. Anyone here familiar with cluster analysis? So when you have 4 answers, you have a 4-dimensional space, right? And in 4-dimensional space, things can have a distance as well as in 3D or 2D. So you measure the distance between all those 32,000 points. And there are different ways to minimize these distances, but they picked one of them. And then they try to make groups where the distance in the group is as small as possible and the distance between the groups is as big as possible. And this way, they formed these groups. This is for 2018, 2019, and 2021. So these are labeled now, but the clustering algorithm doesn't really know what's good or bad. It just groups things. So here we have low, medium, high, and elite performance groups. These will recur, and they are mentioned throughout the books and in the reports. And then we have low, medium, high, elite, and then low, medium, high, elite again. And those are like significantly different groups. And yes, and how then do we figure out? Yeah, and the difference changes. So since they haven't been pre-boxed, saying those who deploy 2 times per day, they are in this group, and those who deploy 5 times per day, they're in this group. They who do it monthly, they are in this group. But they're letting the data figure things out. So the relationship between the groups vary depending on what year it is. So you can also, besides looking at how the groups move and trying to figure out what that means for the IT industry, we can also see what happens with the relationship between the groups. Okay, so now we know that we can group the IT industry based on 4 metrics. We know that those metrics, at least 3 of them, creates a solid construct that can divide the industry into significantly different groups, and that those behave differently. But how do we know what's bad and good in this? That's where the money comes in. They didn't only ask about stability and velocity. They also asked about profitability and market share and productivity. And that's why we know that some are elite performers and some are low performers. Because those 3, sometimes 4 metrics predict financial results. But that's not all. They also predict turnover in the company. There's a shortage of software developers. So if you find good software developers, you want to keep them. And it shows that the same metrics that gives you a lot of money also lets you keep your employees. And they are at a lower risk of burnout. The same things you do to accelerate gives you more money, let you keep your employees. They are happier and they scale. You know what happens when you add people to a team, right? The productivity goes up, but the productivity per person doesn't necessarily go up. This research shows that depends on what kind of performance you have for these 3 metrics. The same things that drive all this good stuff also makes it possible to scale your software development with more people. The low performance, they counted commits, so commit per person. And for low performers, if you added more people, commits per person went down. If you were a medium performer, you could keep a stable amount of commits per person while adding more people. For the elite performers, adding more people increased the amounts of commit per person. And if this wasn't science behind it, I wouldn't believe it. I wouldn't believe that it's possible. But they say it's true, and I believe them. And I think that's awesome, because it's a problem that we can't scale, right? But we can scale if we do software right. And I think that's super cool. So, all this stuff, I have 2 things that is actually what I want to say with it. And the first is, there isn't a trade-off between speed and stability. Those 4 metrics went together. If you have more commits, fewer of them will cause an error in production. If you deploy more often, you will have shorter downtimes because it's easier to restore. So there's this myth that you have to go slow to be stable. But this science shows that it's the opposite. If you go slow, you will fail. The same things that enables you to go faster also create stability. The things you need for stability will also make you faster. So I know that's not how a bike works when it comes to physics, but I think it's a good metaphor for speed and stability going together, because it's really hard to bike slowly, I think. The other thing is that acceleration means that you're going faster. So the elite performers, they are speeding up. The gap grows between the low and the elite performers. But everyone can start accelerating. The low performing group is also shrinking. The elite performing group is growing. If you don't start moving, though, you will be outrun. And yeah, so speed and stability goes together. Those who have learned how to go faster continue to accelerate. But it is an option for everyone to join this transformation. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone, because they've checked industry, size of the company, if you do greenfield development, if you have inherited a big ball of mud, their words, not mine. It doesn't matter. Microservices, regardless of all that, this is true. Highly governed industries, yeah. The only exception is retail. So no other industry stands out, but retail is better. So if you're in retail, you have an advantage, probably because you've already been A/B testing for like forever. But all the other industries have an equal standing. So, what should we do? We should be faster and more stable, but how do you do that? Okay, and that is why I need a user group, because there are a lot of capabilities, as they call it. 13, this is from the website right now. They have 13 technical capabilities, 5 that are related to process, 4 that are related to culture, and 5 that are related to measurement. So there's a load of stuff to do. It's things like continuous delivery, continuous integration, automated testing. I actually have one of my favorite graphs here. When there's an arrow, it's predictive. So when you have monitoring, that's predictive of successful continuous delivery, and that drives performance, and that gives profit. If you have a heavyweight change process, that's negatively impacting it. And if you have continuous delivery, that reduces the risk of burnout. But it also drives culture of psychological safety. So we have technical practices driving cultural practices. And I think this, yes. So I won't be able to cover this today. There's no chance. We need a user group for that. But it's things that we know. They've been around. Perhaps not everyone have all their tests automated, or one of the fun things that I found that were surprising to me is that you need to have your stuff in version control, right? And we think that having the code in version control is important. what they found was that having your configurations in version control were more predictive of success than having your code in version control. I read that, and the other day I tried to set up a new greenfield project in a language I haven't used for a while with my newly downloaded IDE, and I was like, yes, we need configuration in version control. Okay, so we have all this stuff, and there's more. So where do we start? DevOps movement has been found of maturity model. If you mention that to Nicole Forsgren, Dr. Nicole Forsgren, one of the drivers in the Accelerate work, you get a wonderful rant. You can see them on YouTube. It's awesome. So we're not going to use maturity models. So what do? We go back to our friend, theory of constraints, the gold rat model, and find our bottlenecks. What's actually our biggest problem? And then we fix that. And then we take the next thing. And we fix that. And then we take the next thing. And we improve that. And we do retrospectives. And we continuously try to do things. There is one exception, though. And that is when it comes to culture. Because there are some things that has to be in place for other things to work. We can have technical capabilities that drive cultural change. But there is a limit to when that can happen. For example, if you start to measure things in a culture that doesn't work, people will start gaming it, blaming each other. So the bottleneck method is awesome, but I would like to lift one cultural aspect. And for that, I'm using Westrum. How many of you know about Westrum cultural scale? Awesome. I'm going to tell you a bit about it. It divides cultures into 3 groups: pathological, bureaucratic, and generative. The first time someone told me about Westrum, I misheard it and thought that someone talked about restroom cultural scale and got all those ideas of how we treat our common areas say something about our culture. So now, I'm going to tell you about Westrum culture using a restroom metaphor. We start with the pathological culture. In a pathological culture, you're making sure never to take the last piece of the toilet paper. Because if you do, and someone finds out, you will be severely punished. Maybe even fired. The only exception is if you know the person who has the toilet paper. You first have to figure out who that is. It's probably one of the seniors who's been there a long time. Because hoarding all the toilet paper, it keeps you safe in the company. So if you know that person, and they're friendly enough with you to give you a new roll of toilet paper, then it's less dangerous. But otherwise, beware. Because a pathological culture is all about punishment. If you're in a bureaucratic culture, toilet paper is refilled Mondays and Wednesdays. If you run out on Thursdays, you have to fill out a form because they're making sure that no one takes more toilet paper than they need, so it's all stored in the lock cupboard. And if you point out that it might be inconvenient to have to fill out a form to get a roll of toilet paper, they will tell you not to talk about it. Because in a bureaucratic environment or culture, rules are the most important things, and mistakes are to be hushed. If it shows that people don't refill the toilet paper, just ignore it. In a generative culture, everyone knows where the toilet paper is stored. If it runs out, you pick a new roll. It isn't that big of a deal. And if you see that it's a problem, that it's often empty when you get there, people talk to each other to try to come up if you need like more storage space, perhaps a shelf for extra toilet paper in the restrooms. because generative culture is about results and solving problems. In a real organization, it's often not the toilet paper that's the problem. You can change it for information, for example. In a bureaucratic organization, you hoard information because information is power. They can't fire you if you're the only one who knows how to set up the servers, right? In a bureaucratic, you can get information, but only if you have the right access and go through the right people. In generative culture, you share information with everyone who needs it. You have documentation. Everything is freely available because it's about results. It's also about collaboration. You don't dare to collaborate in the other types of organization. If the other team runs out of toilet paper, you won't share it with them because then you might run out yourself, right? So that's the Westrum culture with the restroom metaphor, and I hope that you will remember Westrum cultural scale now as well because it rhymes with restroom. Yeah, you got it. So there's a ton. Yes, you have a question.
I think you should spell it out.
W-I-E Westrum, as in the direction. Okay, so like the direction west and the beverage rum, right? Yeah. It's a name. It's a person. It's a research. It's a scientist, sociologist. Yes. And that's one of the things that Accelerate do that I really like, is they don't have to invent everything from the start. So this Westrum scale, they used questionnaires that had already been validated. I think they revalidated it, but when they try to measure something and they need a construct, they say, okay, what have other scientists already validated? Can we reuse that? So Accelerate has a lot of references in the book, and I love that. Okay. So there's a lot of capabilities. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm going to mention the cloud. Because even though you look at all the capabilities and you say, okay, we do all this, I would say that that's not enough. Because you have to do it right. This is not a cloud. A lot of people doing cloud don't do cloud. So what the Dora DevOps team did, first they asked people, do you do cloud? People said, yes, we do cloud. And they didn't see any consistent effects of it. Then they took 5 criteria that a regulatory organization that I've forgotten the name of has described for what actually is the cloud when it comes to computers. And then they asked people, do you do all of these 5? And then they got results. Because if you do cloud, you do things like get an environment when you need it. You have something that looks like infinite space while being able to run a lot of things on the same hardware. And you pay for what you use. And you can scale things on demand. A lot of organizations say they do cloud, but they miss on some of these, and then it won't work. So when you look at the capabilities and think, oh, we do that, think of Winnie the Pooh pretending to be a cloud, and look twice. Do we do it as they say it? Do we do it the way they measured that it actually has an effect? And ending early, so we will have time for more questions. I'll remind you of the bike. Stability and speed is not a trade-off. You need both. And the stairs. The accelerating, they keep accelerate because they learned how to do it. And then they will continue getting faster and faster and faster. But it's never too late to join them and learn how to go faster, because it will be rewarding. Thank you. And questions? Yes?
You're presenting facts here today, and it's good. But if we look at one thing that you said, if we add more people, the elite are actually delivering more commits per person. Is that by psychological effects that you're in a winning team, that you're, or is it that they have more knowledge together, that they can help each other, or do we know why the elite can thrive from being more people?
The question is, why do the elite performers get more commits per person when they grow? Right?
Yeah. What is the main factor?
What's the main factor? I'm repeating for the camera also with the mic thingy. What's the driving factors? The answer is, if it's in Accelerate or any of the reports, I haven't picked it up. It might be there. I've only read the book like 4 times, so or 3.5 or something like that. But I can guess, an educated guess would be that it's the same thing that you want with software. So if you have an software architecture, it will mirror the team, right? We have this, I've forgotten his name. Yeah, the Conway's law says that the organization and the information flow of a team will be mirrored in the software structure. Like 3 people making a compiler will be a 3-pass compiler. That's things. And I think the same thing applies to scaling. So one of the things that they've seen in the DevOps report is that having an architecture that allows teams to move independently is really important. So if your team can deploy, test, and make changes without even having to talk to any other team, that's a good thing. And if you can do that, you can add more teams without it adding information cost and dependencies. So I think that the architecture is a factor. Yeah. So it could be that.
I guess it definitely could be humans. I mean, if you join a group that have a certain performance, you will copy that.
Yeah, I'm repeating for the camera. It could be the people joining a culture that make them perform better because it's a well-performing culture. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're mirroring people.
Yeah.
Everyone
Yeah.
they don't know about it, but they do.
We mirror people. Repeating for the camera. Yes. Yeah, I think that can be true. I'm a big fan of Ensemble programming, or also known as mob programming. Do you know about it? Yeah, it's not a part of this, but it's like pair programming, but you're a lot of people. So you're like the entire team with one keyboard and one screen. And it's awesome. And the thing that happens then is that you fill out each other's gaps. It's like why we have multiple processors on a computer. We have a lot of them to be able to fork out. We have a lot of them because you're good at different things. Sometimes we have a lot of them because you want to validate that is actually this right thing happening. So if you're a lot of people watching the same code being written and you take turns changing often, the human limitations doesn't really matter as much as if you try to crank out code on your own and even as a pair. So I think that could be one factor as well, that you help each other to catch each other's mistakes. If you have a learning culture, if you add one person to the team and that person teaches everyone else in the team what they know, and then you add another person and that teaches the team everything that they know, everyone gets better, right? So, but if you don't have a learning culture and you add one person and then you discourage this person to do the things that they know from before works, you've lost that person. And I think that's what's happening in the pathological cultures. You hire someone new from the university with all those ideas, and then you tell them, no, we don't do that here. Does it make sense?
Yeah, I just wonder if they have like a proportional impact from all these drivers or something.
Yeah,
Like that. What's this most important? But of course, it's a combination.
More questions or thoughts? You don't have to reframe a thought as a question just because you want to contribute. Yes.
I guess since you picked up on these cultural things, I should add maybe a technical aspect of it would be that if you get more automated feedback on each commit, you'll be able to make more of it.
Yeah. A technical aspect, repeating for the mic, if you get more feedback for your commits and automate everything, you can make more commits. So it could also be a general increase of efficiency for everyone, you think? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you have that performance, maybe that's also a technical aspect that's contributing to that.
Yeah.
And that might be a factor that also makes those elite teams make more commits per person.
In generally, yeah. I definitely think that automating stuff around, getting things out to production, is a key driver. I think the question is, what happens that doesn't make more people just equaling more problems, but like more power. So the automation should increase the commits for a team, but we don't know why it increases the commits for the team when we add people, right? Yeah, but but did you have a thought on how the automation could make that scaling better?
I just had the thought, like connecting to the former question here.
Yeah.
And as you also pointed out in the slides, that if you have the high, like you have this feedback automated thing, that
Yes.
can also contribute to better,
Yeah.
better psychological safety.
Yes. One thing that they talking about is deployment pain. Yes. If you can deploy anytime and it's not a big deal, or if you have to deploy in the weekends when no one is using your service and you know it will be an all-nighter, it's a really big difference. And it's the saying, if it hurts, do it often. When it comes to deploy, it works, because then it's not a big thing. Because, yeah, you've done it so many times that you've trimmed it, and then it's just, yeah, like pushing to, yes?
From a programmer's perspective, I think you just said that the best performance team has the lowest information barrier. And so do you think that a programmer or developer should know, at least study every aspect, for example, every process from writing code to deploy to, or is it better to have someone dedicated to deploy DevOps?
Accelerate, in the book, they write that they can't see a difference if you have separate teams or if it's one team, if I remember it correctly. What they do say is that automated tests that should be written by the developers, that they've seen. You need testers, but they shouldn't write automated tests. They should do things like exploratory testing and usability testing and user testing and those stuff. When it comes to information flow, what they found is also that employees who understands the flow from ideation to actually bringing value to the customers, they have a higher commitment to the company. They've researched how employee net promoter scores. So how likely are your employees to recommend you as a workplace for someone else? And they've also measured how much they identify with the company. And both of those things are known from previous research that they drive the success of the company. And the connection to the company, and I think also the net promoter scores, are connected to how well you understand how your company brings value and how transparent this flow is to you, and if you can affect it. If you get a feature for you that you should implement and you see that, okay, and you get information for perhaps from having a user in your team, and you say that, okay, but we should do this way instead. Giving you that power will make you better connected to the company and better invested in it. And since developers should be able to deploy on demand, I guess that is easier to do if it's you doing it, right? So I don't think it definitely are no ways that you can be an elite performer with a separate operations team, but I think it would be really, really hard. Did I remember to repeat the question, by the way? And the question was, do you have to have dev and ops in the same team, or can you have separate teams for dev and ops? Yeah. One thing they say is that it's important that the people responsible for dev and ops, if they're the same people or different people, they are measured by the same results. And that's also like a key thing, that you shouldn't measure on local things. And that's one thing that's good with this these 3.5, 4 metrics that they use, is it's like a general outside measurement. They're not asking you to count lines of code and stuff, but it's things that actually bring value and that they then proved bring value. And you could argue that a lot of small commits could be gamed, but then there's also a lot of, every time you push to production, you can tweak where you're going, right? So from a lean startup, finding your way, navigating agilely, that's an important thing to be able to do, right? Anything more? Yes?
Have you seen any difference between remote team or colder team?
I don't know, but the publisher of Accelerate, IT Revolution Press, when I visited their website yesterday, I saw that they have a remote handbook coming out. So I don't remember anything about, Accelerate is a couple of years old, so it's pre-pandemic. What they've seen that I do remember is that outsourcing doesn't work. And you can't outsource your testing either. So handoffs, when someone else wrote your software and you're taking care of it, you can make that work. But having someone else writing the software for you won't work, if I remember it correctly. So no, they haven't. I don't remember anything that they've said specifically about remote teams or on-site teams. But it would be really interesting to know, at least since, for the extreme programming, where a lot of these things come from, being in one room is very, very central. So it would be good to know if it's scientifically central as well. But that could be a topic, perhaps, for one of the later events. How do we do Dora Accelerate DevOps style evidence-based remote work. Can we do that?
Yes, this will be a big question after the pandemic. People move back to the normal, the new normal.
Yeah.
Be more remote or
Yeah. I also think that it will be a big thing after the pandemic. A lot of people wanting to continue to work remotely.
There will be data after this.
There will.
There will be data to draw evidence.
Yes, they will have data after the pandemic to draw from after this. Yes, and it's only been one DevOps report that is like pandemic, the 2021. It's soon pizza time. Do we have time for one more? Anyone?
Or maybe kind of two questions if you remember them. Well, the first was about your second purpose with the user group. Like, where do we go after this? And the second is, well, kind of how to. Well, yeah, I haven't read the book, so.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of what's the easy step to integrating some of this into daily, weekly workflows and taking some easy measurements to build on.
The first question was this user group. How are we doing that? I think we could talk about that after the pizza or during the pizza. I have some ideas, but I want to do things user driven. So I don't plan waterfally. This is the user group I want. So I want your input, and then we build something together. The second is, if you want to do this, how do you do it? And I would say, if you have a generative culture that promotes learning, you could try to start measure those 4 metrics, and then you can get an assessment on the Dora website where you can enter your numbers and see where you stand comparing to the rest of the industry, if that's interesting. They also have a lot of really good resources online where you can see what things drive each other, like this. Okay, I should perhaps, if I, no, this won't work because I haven't prepared it. And so the website is awesome. There's loads of resources. Try to figure out what is your biggest pain point right now. When you look at all the capabilities, where do you think that you would get the most out of it? Perhaps which of these 4 metrics would you like to start with improving? Find your bottleneck and then start implementing it. Measure, does it work? Try to fix it. So is that an answer? You could also get a technical agile coach if you need help. I heard there are multiple out there eager to help. But yeah, the website is awesome. Look at it. There are perhaps some boxes you already check. Then you don't have to, they can revisit them when they're the new bottleneck. So yeah, I think that's the way to start. You can also start with what seems the most fun, because that might get you energized. Is that an answer to your question? No pizza? Anything more? Thank you very, very much for coming and listening, and I hope to see you during the break and after the break, and as companions on this journey.